Hello, it's Oscar season, so I decided to check out a few of the films that I missed to see what they're about. I saw most of them when they came out, but a few of the films like Anora just didn't appeal to me at the time. Today I watched Anora, and oh boy is this film a doozy. Written and directed by Sean Baker, this film follows a young stripper from New York. She gets married to the son of a Russian oligarch, but before she can settle into her cozy new life, his parents head to America to get the marriage annulled. It's best defined as a dark comedy, but it's sold as a drama comedy. The story is cut into two parts, and both are about a train wreck situation where all you can do is laugh as you watch things burn. The first part is about the stripper, Annie, and the oligarch's son, Ivan, meeting and falling in love. Annie is your typical dancer. She does private dances, and for the right price, she'll do a little more. When high roller Ivan walks into her club, he pays her enough to get her to come home with him. Then he takes her on an extravagant vacation that ends with him proposing to her. She says yes for some reason, and then we move on to part 2. In the second half of the film, Annie and Ivan are accosted by henchmen working for Ivan's father. There's a brief scuffle that ends with Ivan running off, and then the henchmen force Annie to help them find him. They spend the night literally walking around, showing his picture to people. This goes on until they eventually find him, and Annie ends up learning a hard lesson about summer flings. Okay, to be upfront, I hated this movie. It was boring, and I think the only reason anyone is talking about it is the nudity and sexual content. The first half was an extremely boring sex marathon in which they show us that Annie and Ivan have about as much personality as a wet blanket combined. They're two boring kids who sit around all day having sex, and then she watches him play video games. When they're not at home, they're out partying, which means shots of them drinking and acting like fools in different locations. There's a lot of nudity from the sex scenes and a little bit of stripping along the way. Then in the second half, the film goes in a completely different direction and starts becoming a workplace comedy, where we watch these 4 monkeys running around the city acting like assholes. They get into trouble everywhere they go, make a bunch of funny mistakes you can laugh at, and then eventually they find Ivan the Boring. The situation goes exactly as you expect it to, and then they shoehorn in a romance story between Igor and Annie. On the positive side of things, the cast does an okay job of their roles with a few decent performances. The visual journey is clear and easy to understand, and the story makes sense, sort of. Starting with the story. It's a straightforward tale with no surprises. It shows us 2 characters get into a bad situation, and then we watch the fallout. There's not a lot going on, the characters are pretty flat, but at least you won't be confused. Most of the cast are given one-note comedic roles and do an okay job of them. The henchmen do a good job and pull off a few comedic lines and situations. The actor who played Igor, Yura Borislav, also got to do a bit of subtle emotional work later on in the film during his mini Stockholm Syndrome relationship with Annie. He did a good job conveying a lot through his facial expressions and body language alone. Finally, the visual journey is simple and straightforward. For the first 50 minutes, it involves endless partying and sex between Annie and Ivan. After that, it's an hour and 10 of 4 people wandering the city looking for Ivan. The camera work is mostly mid to close-ups of the characters reacting to the situation as it unfolds, and has a steady focus on capturing the emotions. It does an okay job at getting across how everyone is doing in the moment, but could have been better at getting in tight when it really counted. Which brings me to all of the many problems I have with this movie. Starting with the story. The characters don't make sense and are impossible to get invested in, especially Annie and the gangsters. Annie is a prostitute who doesn't know how to avoid falling in love with her clients despite being a veteran escort. She also falls for the least interesting person in the world and tries to hold on to him for dear life despite no real sparks between them. The gangsters are soft doughboys who wouldn't hurt a fly, one of them being a literal priest, and they spend the entire movie making threats it's clear they either can't or won't follow through on. It's hard to get invested in the story when the antagonists don't have any threats that carry weight and the protagonist is delusional. On top of that, the story is boring as hell. Nothing actually happens. It's just a bunch of sex scenes and then a bunch of scenes of the old guy holding his phone up in different bars while Annie flirts with Igor. The relationship between Igor and Annie doesn't even make sense. In their first meeting, he tied up and gagged her, and she's forgotten that and is ready to give herself to him within a day. I almost got whiplash from that 180. Next up is the cast. There are no standout performances, and the lead roles who are given the most time did a bad job with what they're given. Mikey Madison as Annie plays a self-centered and rude woman in her 20s. In the first half of the movie, we watch her fall for Ivan, played by Mark Eidelstein, and then in the second half we watch her fall for Yura Borisov as Igor. The entire time, she plays an uptight, nasty woman who flings insults and fists at literally everyone around her. Madison plays the nasty parts well enough, but can't seem to find any ground during the romance portions. I think there might actually be more chemistry between two rocks than between her and Ivan, and most of the appeal to her time with Igor is the work Borisov is putting in. Visually, the film doesn't have any standout moments. There are no big dramatic scenes. The closest they get is the kidnapping, and it's played more for laughs than anything else. There's also no crazy visuals in the scenery or any cool action. It's just people having sex and partying, and then a group of people wandering through a city at night. Sound-wise, they had a few original songs and a lot of instrumentals. The original songs are mostly techno and rap songs that are played during the bar and club visits. They're loud, they dominate the scene, and they absolutely interfere with hearing the dialogue. Over and over again. Then the instrumentals appear for short bursts to add a little bit of life to the scenery. The tracks are often too quiet to really take notice of and too simple to remember. They do succeed in adding a little bit of emotion, but not enough to save this train wreck. Personally, I can't believe this film won a single award, let alone multiple. It's boring as hell and the characters suck. The visual journey is very middling, and the soundtrack doesn't do anything for the film. I wanted to turn it off after about 20 minutes. I only sat through it because it won Best Picture. Ironically, it's one of the worst movies I've seen all year. It's so poorly executed. Even the sex is so boring that I'd rather watch two monkeys bang it out on the Discovery Channel than sit through this again. As for a rating, I'd give this film a 3 out of 10. Remember, these are just my thoughts on the film. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Bye-bye!